right, back again, another solo episode. Today's topic is on individualization in coaching and programming. This is something I've been reasonably vocal about over the years, and I'm just recording the new coach development course at the moment, and I just did a video, and I thought this would actually make for a really good podcast topic where we can unpack it a little bit further. So, of course, there are elements of coaching that have to be individualized. That is absolutely true. But too often people lean so hard into their individualization aspect that they kind of miss the forest for the trees. What it really speaks to is an understanding or a reflection of the understanding of the coaching training paradigm and process, whether you're a lifter or a coach, right? So if you are a lifter, your desire for individualization speaks to your inexperience of knowing how training and coaching works. If you're a coach and you over-individualize, it kind of speaks to the fact that your systems are maybe not completely cohesive or intact. And so let me explain what I mean by that, because that sounds kind of negative, and I don't mean it in a negative way. The reality of anybody who coaches is that in their head, they have a select range of frameworks for pretty much everything that they do. And everything that they do points in the direction of those frameworks. I'm really big on making those frameworks explicit, as in like bringing them to the surface and really unpacking exactly what it is, what it means, so we can just focus on that. So let me speak in English for a second. What I mean by that is, like, let's just use the example of technique. I believe there is a gold standard, and I've put very clear definitions as to what I believe the gold standard of technique to be for squat, for bench press, and for deadlift. So every coaching decision that's made works towards that. And when you have that understanding, when you have a deeper understanding of the principles, individualization becomes about moving the individual towards the principle. If you don't have a deep principle understanding or framework or basis to lean on, what you end up doing is changing the framework to suit the individual. You do it in reverse, and that creates problems. That creates inconsistencies. So really, when it comes to individualization, it requires a very in-depth understanding of the systems and the processes that you're using. Let me use another example just to hammer the point home. If I give any coach, or really any lifter, or anybody who's invested in training and has any sort of understanding of programming, if I give a coach 10 people and I say, write 10 strength blocks for these 10 people, even the coach who is the absolute pinnacle of individualization starts with a blank piece of paper for every single person. If you look at those 10 programs for 10 individuals, 10 different people, the framework of the program will be pretty much the same. Because in that coach's head, there is a clear definition, a clear framework, a clear set of parameters for what strength training is or is not. And it has to fit within those parameters for the coach to be happy to pass that on. So when we're talking about individualization in powerlifting, it's important to have these clear definitions in place so that the individualization makes sense. Again, the real art of individualization, which is truly just the definition of coaching, is about having the skills, the tools, the understanding to meet the client with where they are at, and essentially hold their hand to walk them in the direction of the desired destination. You are the leader in that case. You have the experience and the knowledge. You have the direction. You know what you need to do to move them in that direction. And that is your job. That is what individualization is. So if we sort of break this down and start to look at it from a true coaching perspective, I really like the idea of technique, because again, I have a very defined gold standard of what technique is to be. And everything I do from a coaching perspective, everything I teach from a coaching perspective, everything we do at ZeroW from a coaching perspective hinges on that understanding of technique. If we're talking about technique, right, it makes sense for you to think that technique needs to be individualized, because when you look at squats and benches and deadlifts, they all kind of look different. Lots of people are doing different things. And so it creates this idea that, well, maybe there are multiple roads to the same destination. We take a slightly different approach over years and years and years, and looking at thousands and thousands of people lifting and creating a framework based on endless trial and error, bouncing ideas off people much smarter than me, I've arrived at this gold standard. And the gold standard is essentially built on the principle that we are all the same animal doing the same movement. So although you watching this are built differently to me, you might be a different height, a different shape, have a different athletic background, have different mobilities, ranges of motions at joints, all the rest of it, different length arms, different length torsos. You have a shoulder and I have a shoulder. You have a hip and I have a hip. We are the same animal. And if you do squat, bench, and deadlift, guess what? I do too. Within these lifts, there are certain fundamental biomechanical rules that apply to everyone. That's why when coaches teach people how to breathe and brace, they teach everyone the same thing. The same thing should then apply to the shoulders, to the hips, to the knees, to the ankles. We all move in the same way. I've used this analogy endless times. But if I bust up my shoulder and I go to a physical therapist, a physiotherapist, and say, hey, my shoulder is busted, they don't take a photo, a measurement, an MRI, X-ray, CT scan, send it away, get a perfect model of my shoulder made, and say, hey, Thomas, come back in. This is your shoulder. This is what's wrong with it. This is how we fix it. No, they just reach under the desk and they pull out a model of a human shoulder. They say, you're a human. You have a shoulder. This is what you've done to your shoulder. And this is the typical rehab protocol based on years of research and understanding and science to determine how we fix this particular thing. That's how we need to look at lifting. And if we can do that, what we start to find is, okay, everyone's got hips, everyone's got shoulders, everyone moves kind of the same. Well, then we can find global principles. We can find a global cueing system. We can find language that speaks to those principles that will produce consistent results. This is how I've been able to successfully create lifters or work with lifters to create technique that looks kind of the same across the board despite the different shapes and sizes, and doesn't look the same as in, all right, everyone has to arch their back as hard as they can and shove their knees out or something like that. But from a fundamental principle perspective, people are able to execute the movement. So while it might look different because they're different shapes and sizes, the fundamental principle execution of the lift is done consistently. And so the way we do this, I say all this not to brag about my system or something, but to say that the individualization is not about assessing the lifter and going, okay, what's special about you? What's unique about you? How do I lean into that? It's about going, okay, you are a person. You have this set of biomechanical rules that applies to you. How do I need to work my system to get you to move towards those biomechanical rules? And thus, the individualization is the coaching. It is the layers of, here are the global cues that I would use to achieve the development of the movement that I see as the gold standard. Okay, it's not looking that great. We need to move to the next level. Maybe I need to use different language to get you to understand the feeling of what this movement should be. And from there, if that's not hitting, maybe I need to use directional cues to tell you specifically how to move a part of your body so that I can then relate it to a feeling and then relate it back to the developmental global cue. So there's a set of individualization. The global cue is consistent. Then the feeling and the directional cues will be individual based on what I see happening in front of me. The same could be said for the next steps. Okay, maybe the cue's hitting. Maybe I'm getting this person to change the way they move, but it's not maintaining at scale. So they can change the way they squat with 50%, 60%, but at 70%, it starts to regress and fall apart. The individualization then comes down to, what do I need to select next, and how do I need to build that into their program such that it carries over effectively into the main lift? And that will then carry through to the next exercise and the execution of that, and the next exercise and the execution of that, and the building of the overall programming. So the individualization is less about making some sort of special concession for individuals, but rather individualization is coaching. Individualization is picking the right tools from a consistent subset of picking the right tools from a what am I trying to say here is picking the right tools to apply to a consistent system. So like, again, it's the exercise selection, the execution. It's some of the softer side of coaching. Maybe the individualization relies on, here are the fundamental principles, but for you to create buy-in and enjoyability, we need to do this. And that creates adherence, and that creates a result. It's, again, I just want to labor the point that individualization is not reinventing the wheel. There's a reason why there are very, 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 very few outliers, and the outliers typically don't stand the test of time. So like everyone's using the example of the person using 7 bench SBD days a week. That is not going to be sustainable. I'm more than happy to throw that out there and be very confident with that. It won't be sustainable. And it may be sustainable in terms of the ability to do it, but it won't be sustainable in terms of producing results consistently. It will probably not be sustainable in terms of the effects that it has on the body, in terms of like pain and injury. It won't hold up to the test of time. And if that were an acceptable method that does work, because most humans are not special, we would have already figured that out. Like we would already know that by now. That's why most of the best results are produced by very simple methods. There's very rarely anything special about it. For example, like semi-sumo, right? Semi-sumo deadlifts are not special. There's a reason why no one pulls semi-sumo. It's because you don't get the best of both worlds. You literally get the worst of both worlds. And don't play the card of Ed Cohn, because Ed Cohn didn't pull semi-sumo. His sumo was narrow because of his proportions. His sumo ticked the boxes of what a good sumo would be in terms of like where the hips end up relative to where the feet end up relative to the hips and so on and so forth. So Ed Cohn doesn't count. Plus Ed Cohn's Ed Cohn. He can do what he wants. No, but in terms of, coming back to the heart of the topic, individualization, again, I can't labor the point enough that individualization is just coaching, and coaching is, again, meeting the client where they're at and providing the tools and the skills that's built on the experience around a consistent system to walk them towards the result, the desired outcome. It's honestly as simple as that. If you find yourself having to reinvent the wheel for every client, it's not because the wheel is broken. It's because you haven't found the wheel. You're making square wheels. You're making rectangle wheels. You're making wheels that don't work. You shouldn't have to reinvent it. You find that perfect wheel, and then you apply the right spokes to get that wheel to turn effectively for the individual. Damn, that analogy. I kind of saved it in the end. I was losing it there for a second, but I think I pulled it together. All right. Just checking the time here. This is a nice quick one. I think I don't really have anything else to say on this. Hopefully that was a good one, a nice quick one for your ear holes today. Enjoy that. I'm away for a couple of weeks, but hopefully I land in time to catch up and record and keep these rolling. I'll see you soon.